Okay, so we're going to start with a few testimonials for Bob, Myron, and Fisher. And we're going to start with Doug Breeden, who recorded a short message for us. So maybe we can turn off the music, if possible. And we are filming this, am I correct? All right, great. So here we go.
I'm Doug Breeden, and I'm very sorry not to be at the conference as intended. Unfortunately, I fell down the stairs and broke an ankle, and I'm awaiting surgery in a couple of days here in North Carolina. Bob Merton and Myron Scholes and Fisher Black were so important to me and to the work that I've done. I'll tell you some of the ways that I've been involved in using their model, which are pretty amazing models. First of all, I was students of Bob and Myron in 71, 72 at MIT. I was an undergrad there, and I took courses from both of them. First year finance from Bob and financial institutions from Myron. And then I studied it more in the PhD program at Stanford. And at Stanford, of course, Bob Litzenberger was my teacher. And we did the what's now, I guess, often called the Breeden-Litzenberger method, building on what Black, Scholes, and Merton had done. We used their pricing model in our 78 paper to come up with time and state prices that applied the model of Kenneth Arrow and Gerard Debreu, time state preference. So the Black Scholes model allowed us to apply the time state preference model. Then I got the urge to go out into the business world. I think Myron helped with some of that with our work with the futures exchanges. And we started Smith Breeden Associates. I started that with a guy named Smith, and we focused on mortgage securities. And mortgages, of course, have the prepayment option. And we had to value that and model that. And as I worked on that, the intellectual side of that and the applied side of that, I often used the shapes of the functions, the delta functions having S-curves, and the mountain shapes of the gammas and so on, as we modeled mortgage-backed securities. And I think Eric Rosenfeld and some of the Solomon Brothers team and others on Wall Street were also furiously working on mortgage-backed securities using option pricing insights of Black, Scholes, and Merton. Additionally, we went into corporate bonds at Smith Breeden, and whose work is known in corporate bonds. Well, of course, the Black Scholes model is the pricing of options and corporate liabilities, so they were well aware of how it could be used for debt. And Bob Merton did the classic work in 1974 on the pricing of corporate debt. And we applied that to pricing high yield bonds and investment grade bonds as well. So option pricing hit those. And then as we did pretty well at Smith Breeden and made some money, we had brought on a board of directors, board of trustees for our mutual funds, and invited Bill Sharp and Myron Scholes to be on that. And we had them on the mutual funds for 10 years and had a great time together building money management at Smith Breeden. I was able to work with Bob Merton also on a board. I had banks that we invested in and a holding company called Community First Financial Group, and I asked Bob Merton to be on the board of that. So they've been teachers, friends, and board members as well there. And we've had our ups and downs together at different times. We saw LTCM do its big surge and then have the big fall in 1998. And we supported them. And actually, I remember in 1999, well, we went to the Nobel Prize ceremony in 97. Then the 98 events were difficult. And in 1999, we went to the Kentucky Derby with Bob and Myron and got them named Kentucky Colonels as well. I'm sure they need that alongside their Nobel Prize. And then after we had worked together and then in 2008, 2009, Smith Breeden got hammered, and I did too, along with that, and they supported us. So we've supported each other through a lot of big ups and big downs and remained great friends all along the way. We've all learned that it's not so easy sometimes applying the greatest theories in the world And leverage makes a little bit of difference on that too. I know there are a lot of distinguished people in this room who know a lot more about some of these things than I do. So very sad I'm not there to celebrate with you this major breakthrough and these wonderful people. Andrew, I apologize that I had to pull out, and you're going to have to do the discussion for John Hull. But John Hull, you're going to be all the better for it because Andrew will do a better job than I did. Anyway, all the best and warmest wishes to Bob and Myron and everyone in the room. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Hindi. So happy and so proud to be here on this occasion. And we're all friends here. So I wanted to tell you some very good news about myself. I have two kids, 26 and 20. And recently they started to realize that I'm not the uncool simpleton that they have been thinking they have for a dad for a long time. So they come to me and says, "Oh, Dad, we kind of realized that you got yourself associated with Bob Merton and Myron Scholes." I said, "Yeah. So what?" I said, "Oh, these guys are great." So I got a couple of inches taller, and I started to lecture them about the option pricing formula and what I said, no, we know about all of this. I said, "So what do you know?" They say, "We know about the trillions of transactions that these guys have created. We know about the thousands of people that have been employed in the industries that these people have generated. We know about the Nobel Prizes, and we know about 17. So I knew about all of this, but what is 17? Said, 17, the 17 equations that changed history. And they showed me the chart, starting with Pythagoras, with Einstein, with Newton, going all the way to number 17, the Black and Scholes. So they told these guys are immortal, and you know them. So I said, "What do you want from me? What do you want?" That we really want to know what these guys are like. So I'm going to tell you what I told my kids. I'm not going to tell you anything about what they have done, because everybody here knows much better than me what they have done. But I can tell you about how I feel when I see Bob and when I see Myron. Unfortunately, I didn't see Fisher Black much. I was a little bit younger. He was gone by the time I was here. But so I talked to my kids and I says, let's start with Bob. Bob is a generous giant. And the way you feel when you talk to Bob is when you go to the Rocky Mountains only in the morning and you see this massive, big mountain. Everything, you feel you are very, very small compared to that mountain. You see the sun shining, you see everything is so clear, and then they tell you there is a mine of gold out there. And you go there and you look and you find pieces of gold, and you find this person who is very generous and is willing to give you pieces of gold, this giant, this generous giant. And I first met this generous giant when I was a PhD student. I decided this is the piece of research I'm going to work on, which happens to be a very tiny extension of his original work on optimal consumption. And I was told I have to go talk to Bob. He was at Harvard at the time. And I tried for almost 2 months to get an appointment. He had his assistant. She was very protective of him. I tried, I bled, I bribed her, and she finally said, "Come, you can only have 5 minutes with him." So I ran all the way to Harvard Business School. I knocked on the door. I opened. I saw the biggest office I've seen in my life. They really have fantastic offices there. And there's this massive desk, and there's a very nice sofa next to it. So I expected him to be at the sofa and at the desk, and I'm going to talk to him. He came, he shook my hands, and he sat next to me on the sofa and asked me what I want. So I said to him, I want to work on this problem. And of course, I was looking very nervously on my watch because I only had 5 minutes. So he started talking to me about the problem, what it means, how it came about. And 5 minutes I looked, he didn't stop, so I didn't stop him. And he gave me one of the most instructive lectures I've got in my life. How to think about finance, what it means, what's the difference between the functional approach and the institutional approach. We went into physics. What's the difference between modern finance and physics? How do you construct things from simple pieces? And he gave me his example that I'm sure everybody loves about the stereo components and how now you can put together your stereo system and so on. And he kept going and going and going. I am getting filled with information. And I looked at my watch and 19 minutes has passed. I walked in, he doesn't know me from Adam. He gave me a fantastic lecture for 90 minutes one-on-one. And that has been, every time I talk to Bob, has been my experience with him like this. I had the pleasure of working with him at LTCM. We traveled a lot. I learned so many things from him. And I'm sure you have learned many things completely outside option theory, about hedging, about if you want to learn about the history of the German financial market, what does the word Schuldschein means? Talk to Bob. If you want to learn about Merton College at Oxford, Bob will tell you all about it. You want to learn about art, he will tell you about his visits with the Prince of Liechtenstein and his art collection. How does it compare to the art in the Louvre? Every time you see Bob holding court, my advice, go plant yourself next to him and listen, because this giant person who is very generous with his knowledge is here for all of us. Then they say, okay, that's very good. How about Myron Scholes? So how can I describe Myron Scholes? So I said, Myron, I'm talking to my kids. I said, Myron is a wonderful spirit. They said, what do you mean wonderful? I said, he is a wonderful person, but he also is wonderful in the sense of wonder. He is like a kid, very smart, naughty kid who sees wonder in the world. You know, when you go to the zoo with like a 10-year-old, you have been jaded, you have seen the elephant many times, but you have a 10-year-old, he sees the elephant for the first time, and he starts to see the trunk, the tail of the elephant, and he starts to ask questions, and you get so excited. You see the elephant in a new way. And you also have a wonderful time at the zoo. You get an ice cream, and you go home happy, filled with wonder about the world. That is Myron Scholes. Anytime you talk to Myron, you get the sense of the wonder of the world. Any topics that he talks to you, he will tell you something that you didn't know before. Or he'll tell you something that you have seen many times, but never thought about it this way before. It just happened as we were having dinner right now. So I just really don't know what to say other than I have been very, very fortunate to have been associated with these people. I also want to point out to really two personal things that I think many people have not seen, but are very important. Number one is that, as Doug have said, we have been through tremendous ups and tremendous downs. And that could have broken a lot of relationships and a lot of people. But I remember very clearly, Myron, he comes to me and says, why do you look so glum? I said, I'm not glum. He said, no, you're glum. Let's go for a walk. We go for a walk, and he talks to me about Indian culture. He will talk about the Chinese Zen, and he talks about that's not the end of the world. The world will go on. There are so many things that's going to happen. I remember going to meetings to Bob to raise money, and we put our hearts out, and then we bomb. People don't give us any money. He walks out and says, Ayman, there are more fish in the sea. Don't give up. So I learned that life goes on. Sometimes we get thrown a lot of bad things, but they had the emotional intelligence and wisdom to carry us through these times. They didn't only teach us stuff, but they carried us emotion. Then the final thing that I kind of noticed while we were sitting all day today, I had the pleasure of observing these two gentlemen together. And how many times you read about Nobel laureates who fight all the time, or they don't like each other. These guys were sitting in the two chairs next to each other all day today. You don't have to sit next to him, just stick a little bit further. No. They genuinely like each other. Anytime I call Myron, after he asked me about my kids, he tells me the joke that we laugh on. He asked me, how is Bob? Have you talked to him? How is he doing? the same. When I contact Bob, he always asks me how much they genuinely like each other, they enjoy each other, which is very, very rare. I think that's a great lesson also for all of us. And I really hope that I have friendships like this as I progress. So I'm very grateful for both of them for finally making me look somehow cool in the eyes of my children. I thank them for many, many years of love and support, and thank you for this wonderful evening.
Great. Well, I was struck today, listen, the interview with Fisher's daughters, and it struck me that maybe all Nobel laureates are that way, but Bob and Myron are definitely two other guys that they're very attentive to their kids, and I've been able to watch them grow up and so forth. It's been really a pleasure. Well, I'll take the opportunity to reminisce about 50 years ago. A lot of the people here weren't around 50 years ago, at least not as adults. So I go out of school. First off, I grew up in Kansas, so I go to Chicago for a couple of years, and now I'm out in San Francisco. That's enough of a shock. And we're find out that Wells Fargo is doing an index fund. That's why I joined it, to help them get indexing going. And the two chief consultants and the architects of this crazy idea of passive investing, were Myron and Fisher. And it was amazing because in addition to doing the indexing, as Myron pointed out, they developed this thing called the Black Scholes option pricing model. So all this is going on, my head's spinning. And you talk to Myron, he's trying to get a mail order business going with his brother, and Fisher's coming out, and we have dinner with him. I have dinner with him a lot because I'm the single guy in the department. And he wants to go out for a potato burger all the time, which is a baked potato with sliced open with a hamburger patty in it. Fisher thought that was living, when Eric talked about how he wrote on the blackboard, N-O, I was reminded that one of the original ideas Myron and Fisher had was to lever up the low beta stocks, and because they seem to have an positive alpha. So a lot of debate, a lot of research going on. Finally, we get a little memo from Fisher saying that he and Myron had updated their research and the alpha effect disappeared. That's it? Yeah. Right? So anyway, those were pretty heady times. And the thinking that went into the first passive vehicle, this Samsonite account, most people seem to forget about that, the insight. We built a firm around it. Flexibility has value. And we've been applying that for 40 years. And a lot of it, I really got the education on that with Myron and Fisher. And as I mentioned today, that's really only half of the story. The other half of the story is really with Bob and learning from him this relation between flexibility and trust. Trust, I tell people, investment solutions is our business and trust is our product. And it's great to have flexibility, but the greater the flexibility you have, the more opaque you are, the less transparency, and the more difficult it is for people to trust. So it's so important. It's great to have flexibility, but there's a trade-off. It's not unlimited flexibility. Be as flexible as you want. It's controlled flexibility. So that's, what can I say? I've built my career around the thinking of these two guys and Fisher, and been able to hang out with two incredible guys. It's I agree with everything's been said. I mean, these are not, they're not normal people in the sense of, anybody eats a potato burger is not a normal person, but normal, not normal in a great way. As I've gone to their classes over the years, I just see the attention they give the kids. They're really trying to help people out. I really think that's helped students out. They've helped me out, a lot of people in the room out. And I think that's really their contribution. Through the option pricing model, they were able to really help people out, which I think is really their goal. So I'm proud to be associated with them over all these years.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I'm the second of the 4 girls. I wasn't planning on saying anything, but I did really want very quickly to say Dad knew, obviously, after the cancer came back, that he had a terminal diagnosis and that he wasn't very likely to see too much longer. And when I went down to stay with him in Connecticut with my sisters, he had on the kitchen table this stack of letters and notes that you all and everyone else in your community who really had the gift of him in some manner in your lives. And I just wanted to thank you all who took the time to tell him and to reach out to him and write the letters and call and just tell him how cherished and how important he was to all of you. And in fact, in response to what the interviewer asked Alethea, what would he have thought had he been able to receive the Nobel Prize? I actually asked him that because he did mention that it was likely that sometime in the next 5 years, he thought it might be likely. And I said, isn't that kind of going to be dramatically sad? And he said, no, he might have said, I'm pretty sure I would have gotten it eventually. But more importantly, he said, this has meant more to me, these letters, and the esteem of his colleagues. And I just wanted to tell you how deeply I appreciate that and all the love that you shared with them. So thank you.
And I just wanted to add, that was beautiful, to Melissa's anecdote, that I heard from my dad that it may have been someone in this very room, actually, who spoke with him in 1994 and said, we have heard that you're on the short list for the Nobel Prize. Do you want us to tell the committee that you have terminal cancer? And he said, if you do that, I will kill you myself. So I think that's why he knew that it might be happening. And I don't know if it was someone here who said that, but I've always loved that he had that response, and that it was such a purist, as you all know, and he just didn't want to feel like he was forcing anybody's hand in even the slight. You could have made an argument, well, if they're going to do it anyway, at least give them the choice to do it now if they know that you're ill. But I think that he found that idea to be not pure. And so he asked the person, whoever it was, I wonder if it was Doug, to please not do that. So yeah. I've always loved that story about him. And I'm glad that we ended the interview with Melissa and me when we did, because I'd been thinking of saying, sometimes I count the blessings in my life and all the ways I was lucky. And I always think that the most lucky that I was in being born his daughter, but I was afraid that I would start to cry if I tried to say that. So I was glad that we ended with Perry Merling instead of me.
They're a hard act to follow. So I have to do it again. As most of you know, I wrote this biography of Fisher Black. I remember Aaron Brown visiting me in my office at Barnard in the basement. And he was the first person to write a review of the book. And he came in and he said, this isn't really a biography, is it? You mean there's nothing much very personal there? I said, well, it's not That's true. It's a history of ideas. It's really about the intellectual stuff. And I know lots more personal stuff than I put in the book, but I don't want to distract from the story. And I think that's what Fisher would have wanted too. And so he said, oh, okay, I hadn't really realized that. It looks like a biography, but it feels like a biography, but it's not a biography. It's another story. So I want to tell you a little bit about that. But first, I'm really very happy to be invited to be here. And Bob and Myron, who helped me with this book, I couldn't have written it without them. And I will just tell you a little bit about why I did this. And then we'll come around to Fisher a little bit. I had written a book about American monetary economics from 1920 to 1970. And it was 3 biographies. It was sequential. But I realized after I finished that book, which got me tenure, thank you, that the story after 1970 was all about finance. Okay. And so I thought, what should my next book be? And for a while, I was thinking about another triptych, but this time contemporaries, not sequential. And I said, I will write, maybe I need like an economist, like maybe Franco Modigliani or Tobin. And maybe I need a central banker, like maybe Volcker or something like that. And maybe I need a finance person, like maybe Fisher Black. And when I looked at Fisher Black, the papers, I said, I can do the whole thing with Fisher Black. I don't need these other people. I can tell the whole story because he had such a varied life. Okay. And that's what I want to talk about. I know this topic of your conference here is derivatives. Okay. Derivatives was just one little thing that he did. And so that's why it made a better, this was good for a book to have a capacious character with 50 boxes of files too. So you can create a whole book on him. And so it hasn't been mentioned today. Perhaps it was last night. I wasn't here. Here's a guy in a time when economics was all about Keynesians and monetarists, Chicago versus Cambridge. And he actually was at both places. He was first at the University of Chicago. That was his first academic job. And then MIT recruited him. This is a very odd thing to be happening. He's in both of these camps, and yet he's in neither of these camps. He's an academic, but then he goes to Goldman. He's a practitioner. He's both of these things. So you can tell both of those stories with this guy. He is a finance guy, but he's also very interested in macroeconomics and in money, which was me. I was a monetary economist. I still am. Think of myself as a monetary economist. But taking some of the insights of finance, this thing that's in your little bag of all these 50 questions, or I think maybe it's 100 questions. If you look, I urge you to look at that. They're not about derivatives. They're about everything. They're about, there's like 10 questions about monetary economics. There's 10 questions about international finance. He was interested in the whole world. Okay. And his vision of finance was about the whole world. I titled my book, Fisher Black and the Revolutionary Idea of Finance. I remember Aaron Brown coming in and asking me this question. And so I said, what is the revolutionary idea of finance? What's my book about? You said you read it. He said, well, I guess that's CAPM. I said, yes, that's right. For Fisher, CAPM was the vision that he could apply across all of these fields, okay? And it was CAPM, in fact, that led him to the option pricing formula too, although the replicating formula came later and was more productive, as we've heard. But the way he solved the problem was in a very unusual way. The paper that people are talking about their favorite Fisher Black papers. So there's a paper he wrote extremely young called Banking in a World Without Money. Okay, that is really about understanding CAPM as a forecast for how the world is going to look 50 years from now. And you know what? He was kind of right. Go back and read that paper and you'll see he saw the future. He saw what this new finance thing was going to do. And what did it do? Okay, so this is not just about solving derivatives problems. It's about actually changing the world, okay, after 1970. Financialization is one of these things, okay, that has spread, that these ideas have spread into every corner, but also globalization. And so that the financial flows between countries, gross flows, are just enormous. You've got to remember, back in 1970, everyone is, in NEPA and Keynesian, and it's all about trade. The notion that the capital account is where all the story is, that's sort of new. that's sort of new. I'm speaking as a historian of economics. And so people wonder, what happened to Perry? He wrote that book in 2005 about Fisher-Black, and then he kind of disappeared. Well, I did not. I followed the line. The next book was about a history of the Fed, a biography of the Fed. So that's the monetary stuff. And I just finished this book, so I have to plug this a little bit, about Charlie Kinderberger, who was here at MIT. Okay, International Money, Money and Empire is my latest book. So it's about the rise of the global dollar system. Fisher and Kindleberger are actually much more kindred spirits than you might imagine in this regard, seeing how the world is evolving institutionally. So the last thing I'll say is about the importance. I'm speaking now as a social scientist. I'm now actually as professor of international political economy at BU. Three social changes that have come from 1970. I said everything is about finance after 1970. And I think Fisher sort of had a sense of all three of these. So I just put them on the table, okay? There was in our culture three fetishes, okay, that this logical man said, these are fetishes, they're not true, okay? One is sort of the fetish of safety. We heard Bob was talking about risk, embracing risk, saying risk is not a danger. It can be your friend if you manage it. So the fetish of safety, for generations that grew up in the Depression and World War II, they had a natural fetish for safety, okay? And so it took a while, and finance was part of that, is becoming comfortable with risk and uncertainty and the unknowability of the future, in fact. As opposed to economics, which likes intertemporal general equilibrium, the unknowability is possible with the option pricing formula. That's the first fetish. The second fetish is I call to my students the fetish of the real, okay? Imagining that what's happening in the economy is the trading of goods. That's what it is. I mean, to look through the veil of money and look through the veil of finance. Finance helped you see, no, actually, finance is sort of the fabric of the economy. It's not a veil over top of it. It's the actual infrastructure. That's a new idea, okay, in 1970. And then the third one, which is, I come back to my most recent book, is I call the fetish of sovereignty. This notion that there are these individual countries, with their own currencies and their own central banks and their own finance ministers, and they're choosing their macroeconomic policy. And it's just not true. Okay, it's a global dollar system. Everyone is in it. And the question is, what is your interface with that global system? How do you manage that interface? Economics is still working on this, But I think Fisher saw all of that in 1970. And he saw it because he learned CAPM. The CAPM he learned was from his friend Jack Traynor, at ADL. Traynor hasn't been mentioned here, but he should. He also invented CAPM on his own, and he invented other stuff. The Traynor model of the dealer function was extremely important to Fisher. This notion of market making, that it's not just an equilibrium, and that there's an outside spread and an inside spread. Maybe I teach this model, and that's where the noise paper comes from. It comes from his experience at Goldman Sachs and his experience with Jack Traynor. Understanding that, markets are pretty efficient within a factor of 2 of value, that has to be so in a world where you really don't know what the future is going to be, and so we're just guessing, really. And we have markets to help us coordinate our guessing, but that's what they're doing, they're the infrastructure. So this is my, I was asked at the last minute to jot down a few things. Maybe I spoke too long. But anyway, so I learned a lot from Fisher. I was not his student. I was not Bob's student. I was not Myron's student. I never took a course in finance. Neither did Fisher.
Brevity being the soul of wit, I'll promise to be quick. I'm Stuart Zimmer. Bob was my mentor at Harvard College 30 some odd years ago. So at Harvard, there was something called the Q Guide, where you'd look at all the course offerings. And I kind of, as a mathematics student, wandered a little bit to see what kind of sexy courses there were in finance across the river at the business school. And I remember flipping through the Q Guide and seeing Bob's class on continuous time finance. And my heart started pounding, and I started to get really excited. And I almost like turned the cue guide to look at it like that. I was so excited about the class, and called him up on the phone, and he said, "Well, I want to meet you. Come across the river." I practically sprinted from Eliot House, where I was Alethea's classmate in Harvard's class in 1991, and Bob was a lot more generous than 5 minutes promised with his time. We sat down and we got to talking, and even though I wasn't a business school student, he said, I want to take you under my wing. I want to teach you. And I was nobody. I was a poor little Jewish boy from New York, and he took me under his wing for the next couple of years, and I matriculated in his business school class, even though I was a math student. Did my honors thesis work in mathematics with him, and this is before Bob won the prize, but he was already a really big deal for obviously all his contributions to finance, Black, Scholes, Merton just being one of them, and he was just such a warm, beautiful human being. And when you hear the lectures and the talk, maybe that part doesn't kind of come through as his generosity of spirit, generosity with his time, and what it's like to mentor a 20-year-old kid. So I want to say thank you here in front of all these people, Bob, for what you've done as a teacher and professor for decades, and how many countless lives you change. Bob sometimes talks about the option pricing theory of the options value of being a professor. You get to claim your students who've gone on to make billions of dollars, and not necessarily talk about your ones who didn't. I'm so grateful I'm in the former category and have been able to give back to you and teach your class. I think your father would have thought it hysterical that there's a chair in pure mathematics at Harvard College named after you. So I just want to say thank you so much, Bob.
So I think we could probably go on for several hours with these testimonials, but I'm told that we're going to get kicked out of here shortly. So I want to just, on behalf of the MIT Sloan Finance Group, thank all of you for being part of the Black, Scholes, Merton 50th celebration. It's been wonderful having all of you together with us and honoring Bob, Myron, Fisher. And so we hope to see you at the next event, whatever that is. And meanwhile, please get home safely, and thank you again. And we look forward to seeing those of you who are going to be at the GCFP meeting tomorrow, bright and early. Thank you.